Political parties recently submitted candidate lists to the Independent Electoral Commission. It comes at a time when the public is outraged over state capture and multiple other corruption scandals. To discuss the quality of political party candidate lists, joining the discussion is leadership expert Mazwe Majola and political analyst Oliver Dixon. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on this Sunday.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with you, Oliver. So the candidate lists have been submitted. We know that there was extensive vetting processes for each party that submitted lists. And we know that the process of releasing the final lists, once the IEC has gone through them as well to weed out any sort of double names, is going to take some time. Is there an opportunity for the public to really get involved and to actively participate in ensuring that the candidates that appear on the ballot lists are candidates that have integrity, that we can look forward to seeing lead the country in a way that sort of moves away from the past couple of months of scandal, corruption and news headlines that really demoralize South Africans?
Depends on which political party you belong to. So if you're just an ordinary civilian in South Africa, but you consider yourself a member of the ANC, you're a branch member in good standing, you participate in the voting process. The ANC is a very branch-centric political party. In the DA, it's slightly different. There's little public participation and more a rigorous internal process. So, for instance, in the Democratic Alliance, you have to apply to be an MP. Then you write a test, and then you do an interview. And after the interview process, you get shortlisted, and after the shortlisting, you get vetted, and after that vetting process, there's a voting process by senior structures in the party, and that's how you make it onto the party list. Whereas in the ANC, it's a voting process all the way up, and once you're on the preliminary list, you get removed based on very specific criteria, such as do you have a criminal record? If you have one, you get removed from the list, for instance. In the EFF, it mirrors that of the ANC to a large extent. So the public participation can only come from a branch level. And I think similarly with selecting the party's leadership, as we saw in the run-up to Nasrec in 2017 for the ANC, branch members vote, and that's about it. So it's really the only way you can do so. So if you consider yourself a non-partisan South African, there's unfortunately no way for you to participate.
So there's no way for me to comment regardless of my political affiliation.
No, I mean, you can comment.
Process,
I mean, you can comment, but who's going to take your comment serious?
Okay. Is that something that we should possibly be looking at? Mazwe, how do we look at leadership qualities in terms of a very sort of esoteric idea and moving that into a domain where they become very practical principles based on leadership, governance and principle, which are the founding, they're super important when it comes to election time?
Well, yes, I mean, as Oliver's saying, that you'll find different political parties. So within the ANC, obviously governed by the NEC, so the names will be extracted from the branches, the structures, and then the NEC, then they'll look at those names. With the DA, obviously, they apply, and then they are interviewed, and then the higher structures, and then they look at all the names. So in terms of the leadership qualities, of course, yes, now it becomes tricky because the individuals that are roped in there, for instance, when the NEC are looked at all these names, of course, as the integrity commissions, provincial and national, they will also look at in terms of their conduct or misconduct. But in terms of their leadership qualities, it's only the NEC that will say what kind of people we want, what kind of qualities we want. Ideally, obviously, they will be looking at ethical leaders in terms of people who will lead. They'll look at the leaders who will prioritize service delivery, and they'll look at the integrity leaders. They'll look at courageous leaders. So those different leadership qualities they'll be looking for.
Oliver, I'm going to come back to you because unfortunately in this kind of political dynamic, especially when election times are very close, electioneering electioneering sometimes takes over.
Yeah.
And as much as a party wants to elect leadership candidates who are, have integrity, who have good leadership qualities, who have the voice of the people and the interests of the people at heart, sometimes it's also very important from a strategic point of view to put certain people in positions to maintain certain factions. And how does that influence the political dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is. Strategically so, but that's how you consolidate power and maybe end up in a Jacob Zuma situation. Not saying that that's how he consolidated power, but for instance, right now, if you look at the ANC list, there are an enormous amount of candidates on that list who are recognized as staunch Jacob Zuma supporters, who, if they were to have to vote Cyril Ramaphosa out in a vote of no confidence, they wouldn't think twice about it. They would actually go ahead with it. So it would be possible from an ANC list, for instance, to see a recall of the president. When it comes to the list of the Democratic Alliance, electioneering is less of a priority there, because if it was, someone like Diane Kogle-Barnard wouldn't be on the list, right? Someone who's an outright racist that the party has previously found in its own disciplinary processes that this person was found guilty of putting the party in disrepute and also violating the party ethics code by endorsing racist comments, right, on social media. And she was suspended and brought back into Parliament in early 2018. If electioneering was a priority, that wouldn't be. What's really a priority here is for people to secure paychecks, really. It's for people to secure networks. It's for people to secure patronage networks in a lot of instances. And it's for people to secure favor. So Kogle-Barnard may look favorable to her constituency, which is middle-class white women, right? And so they'll vote based on that woman being there because she looks like us and represents us. So maybe that's electioneering from that perspective. But if you're going for broad electioneering, that wouldn't be the case. Similarly, in the case of the ANC, someone like Colin Maine wouldn't be on the list because he's not recognized as any of those things that were described as good leadership. And perhaps maybe I think parliamentary lists are less leadership lists and more representation lists. And I think thinking of legislators as leaders is perhaps misleading because they're more representatives of constituencies, representatives of minority groups in their party, they're representatives of ideas and stuff, and they have a very administrative role, and that role is we are here to set the agenda for what the legislative discussion ought to be, and we are here to set the tone for our legislative democracy. So I think that's more the tone in which political parties look at when they think about their list on parliamentary lists. But when they think about, for instance, things like ministers, deputy ministers, that sort of thing, they think more towards leadership. And that's when those qualities are more of a conversation, or ought to be more of a conversation.
Right. We're going to bring in another guest now. In a recent opinion piece, policy analyst Nkosi Khulule Nyembezi says public interrogation of party candidate lists strengthens democracy. He argues that voters should be able to object to the inclusion of candidates they don't approve of. And he joins the conversation now from our Cape Town studio. Welcome very much, Nkosi Khulule.
Thank you very much.
I want you to give us sort of flesh out that idea for us. We've been speaking about the need for candidates with sort of ethical values who have a high value of integrity, and the process of vetting candidates. Those lists have now been sent through. What changes would you see in the process?
Yes, it's part of our democracy that is maturing, because we know that the Constitution and the electoral laws give political parties the power to select as to who goes to the list of candidates that are going to Parliament, which means that the general electorate does not have a direct say as to who goes into the list of political parties. What is different this time around is that the public is objecting in a more vocal way to some of the names that are on the list. And the question that we are looking to see is the responsiveness of political parties to those objections of members of the public. We know that the electoral laws exclude some category of citizens from running for office. People who have been convicted and without an option of a fine, people who are insolvent, and so on and so forth. But the question now is with respect to people who are implicated in acts of corruption, who are implicated in state capture. And the general public seems to be saying political parties should not include those people on their list, even though they have not yet appeared before a court of law. There is no conviction next to their name.
Does it not then become very easy for parties to discredit each other's candidates as a part of electioneering without the due process being followed?
Well, the due process has to be followed in the sense that the issue of election is a connection emotionally and politically between the electorate and the candidates or the political parties that are running for office. So political parties must take into account this moral duty to be able to ensure that their list is clean. So the due process extends not only into tick boxing the requirements of the law, but also into listening to those things that are saying what is it that is going to bring us good governance. And we can commend the South African public for interrogating the list and objecting to some of the names, because it means we are inculcating a culture of zero tolerance to corruption, zero tolerance to maladministration of public funds. It is up to political parties to listen to that voice, and I do think that that responsiveness is going to be very important, lest the electorate punishes or votes with their feet and punishes the political parties that do not remove those names from their list.
Right, Mazwi, I'm going to come to you. In terms of the political structure, electing officials at a provincial or a municipal level and drawing those people through the process to national leadership at a later stage. I mean, I'm going to compare it to a sports team. You're going to include new players from municipal teams or league sort of teams, and then you're going to draw them up into a national team. If the same thing happens at political levels, how important is it to ensure that on every level, whether it's just in terms of administrative duties, as you were saying earlier, that those qualities of good leadership, integrity, moral fortitude are brought right up through the structures to ensure that the electorate has confidence in the people that they've elected or voted for?
Well, it's crucially important. The political parties must ask the question, why are we bringing these people? I mean, what do these people have that will enhance our service delivery and our political standing within the country? I mean, getting someone like, and again, I know that obviously throwing names probably might be a little bit harsh, but, a person like, as Oliver was saying, Colin Maila. Yeah. I mean, the ANC Youth League chairperson, with, I think, the spokesperson also, Mondli Mkhize, is in the list as well, coming from the ANC Youth League. I mean, the ANC Youth League is dysfunctional, it's non-existent. Never again, any time when the ANC Youth League was at its lowest like this. The ANC Youth League structure is non-existent. But for a person like that to be included in the list, you ask yourself, it's because it's just to appease and balance the faction within the party, or is really, do you identify certain qualities from a certain individual and say, we need these people to come to the national party, or sorry, to the National Assembly or to the provincial? Is it because of certain qualities, characteristics, certain input this person is going to give, or it's because you look at the list and say, let's put this one and let's put this one, let's try and balance, let's take that point.
It seems to be a bit of a chicken and egg situation.
So I mean, yeah, it is. I mean, when it comes to the list, let's go with the example of the ANC. The NEC is the final say. The NEC sits down and goes through this list. And if you have an NEC that's incredibly old, you will have a parliamentary list that's incredibly old.
And that's one of the points that was raised, is that we need more youth.
Yeah, so, and then young people will be disgruntled, as they have with the ANC list. But there are many other things, and I want to go back to what the other gentleman said, that public outrage determines who gets onto the list, and sometimes political parties listen and don't. I don't think so. I think there's been a conflation between newsroom outrage versus public outrage. I think newsrooms and the media has been setting the agenda for who gets to be discussed as problematic candidates on the list, and not the public. Because if it was about the public, you would have realized that the bigger outcry is not Batabile Dlamini being on the list. The bigger outcry is young people not being on the list, right? And I think that if we're going to be fair about public outcry, that would have been the tone at which the conversation has been happening. However, so it is about appeasing. So it is about making sure in the ANC, are there enough representatives from the ANC Women's League? And then you'll be like, okay, yes, there's 53% of them. The ANC list is predominantly female. Are there enough young people? No. Why not? Because the ANC Youth League is dysfunctional. Absolutely. And the NEC is incredibly old. And then you ask yourself, Veterans League, no, we may not consider them this time around. Then you ask yourself things like Young Women's Desk in the ANC Women's League, and these various
and
leagues.
Of course, the criteria are very, very diverse in any party to try and fulfill all the mandates and have each party be entirely representative is a very, very difficult task.
Yeah, I mean, for the national list, you're discussing 200 candidates. That's a very strict number for you're discussing 200 candidates on your national to national list, and in addition to your provincial to national, right?
I'm going to interrupt you then, go back to our guest in Cape Town, Nkosi Khulule. Do you think that South African public, the electorate, is involved enough? Oliver was saying just now that possibly public outcry has been more from a media newsroom position than from the electorate itself. Do you think South Africans are involved enough and outspoken enough in politics and in the candidate list process and in the whole election process in order to ensure that their voice is heard?
Well, it is an evolving issue. But I mean, this time around, the voice of the public seems to be more bold, seems to be more vocal. But again, there are constraints in terms of what can be achieved. For example, we know that the electoral system, as I have mentioned, gives power to the political parties to be the ones that take these decisions as to who goes into the list and ends up eventually becoming a public representatives. Perhaps we need to look at the amendment of the electoral system so as to allow individuals who are not affiliated to political parties, independent candidates, to also contest elections at provincial and national level, such that when there are objections to what political parties are doing as institutions, ordinary people can still have another option, availability of options in terms of candidates that are not political party affiliated. But again, we understand that the decision to include some of these people that there are objections against is a political one that political parties are taking. For example, we do know that some of the individuals are very powerful and are likely to draw support and voters for the political party. So in the gambling process, some political parties think that it is a risk worth taking to put those names insofar as they can attract voters, as opposed to the opposite of excluding them, which may prove to be to reduce their fortunes when it comes to getting more seats in Parliament.
Right, thank you very much. And of course, you can't keep anyone or everyone happy all the time. So we will carry on our coverage during our election coverage of those candidate lists, and as the time approaches, see how things unfold. Thank you very much for your time, gentlemen. We've been speaking to Nkosi Khulule Nyembezi from our Cape Town studio, to Mr. Mazwe Majola, who is a leadership expert, and to political analyst Oliver Dixon. Thank you.